Hi, this is Chris Renee, Director of Business Services for AESA. I want to thank you for your time today as we have our AESA business partner, Behavior Advantage, here to discuss behavior plan and how to adapt to ever-changing student behavior. Please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions during the presentation and also afterwards. Let me turn this over to Aaron, founder and CEO of Behavior Advantage. Aaron?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks AESA for having me. I'm a board certified behavior analyst and CEO of Behavior Advantage. And I usually like to start these off with just kind of talking about my practice and what I've done to support school districts, educational agencies, and non-public schools over the last 20 years, because I am a clinician actually more than a software person, and have spent a career helping kids with behavioral challenges learn new skills, adaptive skills, and just to be better students in educational settings and in home settings. And all of that experience has been poured into Behavior Advantage to help educators design behavior intervention plans to do that exact same thing in a very efficient, effective way. And what I'd like to talk to you all about today is how you can design simple behavior intervention plans for students who are causing some disruptive behaviors in the classroom that might not be at an extreme level or a tier 3 level if we're using MTSS language, but more of a tier 2 or a tier 3 minus disruption, work refusal, inappropriate social behaviors. And when we look at those behaviors and we want to be proactive and get ahead of them, sometimes a simple behavior plan is all we need to structure and recommend a couple evidence-based practices that are matched to the student's need, and then implement that with fidelity and progress monitor along the way to see if it's working. This can be just a really solid component of any school or educational agency's MTSS support systems to help those kids who are just starting to show emerging behavior problems. And what we're going to go over today is that behavior plan is not just for the student. Those behavior plans are also really for the adults supporting the students, because it provides them a roadmap on how to implement those evidence-based practices consistently over time. So what I'd like to do today is really talk about the underpinnings of simple behavior intervention plans and kind of the perspectives that we want all of our team members to have. And then let's look at how that can lead to the effective implementation of evidence-based practices, and then how we can use Behavior Advantage to address a student's behavior problems. And I've got a case study for us, and we can all chip away at this together. It's a fun exercise because this is kind of how we would lead clinical support to our educators. So a couple of things that we want to think about first, and this is what we believe here at Behavior Advantage, is that all kids benefit from positive, consistent, nurturing environments and experiences. That being said, some kids need extra help practicing kind, socially responsible, and independent skills and behaviors. Despite those positive climates, despite that tier 1 PBIS support and good relationships, some kids are going to need some extra help. And then what we know is that really it's about the adults implementing those supports. And so what they need are the most effective, efficient, and evidence-based supports in order to get those plans implemented effectively. When we implement behavior interventions, let's look at what we're really trying to do. First of all, even when we're looking at simple BIPs or FBA-driven BIPs, we always want to consider context and function. So where and when are these behaviors occurring and why are they occurring should always be part of the discussion before designing the behavior intervention plan. Then we take that information and we match and recommend evidence-based practices that align to the context and function of the student's individual behaviors that we're trying to address. Okay, so that's a really clinically, I think, very fun part of the process is matching strategically evidence-based practices to context and function. And then we implement those interventions with fidelity and progress monitor over time to see if our plan is working. Okay, when our plans are based on these three components, then what we're really asking adults to do is to design environments and experiences for the student that promote opportunities, frequent opportunities to practice essential replacement skills and social behaviors like kindness, social responsibility, independence, adaptive skills, self-regulation. The list goes on and on. And when we're effective in doing those three things, it gives us an opportunity to acknowledge and reinforce the student's efforts at trying to practice these new skills. And when that comes together over time, that is how we start building lasting positive habits. This is an important perspective to have for all of our team members because it really shows how we want to build our plans and also moving forward that this is not going to change behavior overnight just because we built and designed a wonderful, simple behavior intervention plan, but that we also need to do the work to get it implemented. Okay, so when we talk about, function, for instance, we know that some students are finding themselves in a classroom where no one's paying attention to them, and they might start experimenting with inappropriate behaviors in order to get the attention of my classmates are now laughing at me and my teacher is talking to me. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about function. But we have other kids in the exact same classroom environment who have learned to try to plug into the content being delivered, raise their hand, participate, and the result is the same. They're getting attention. And so both kids are getting their needs met, but the problem here is that one student has learned to do it in an inappropriate way, and another student has learned to do it in a more adaptive and classroom appropriate manner. The point here is that these patterns of behavior are learned over time and they can be taught. And so what we want to do as part of our behavior plans is design environments that promote more adaptive skills. This is how we learn. The next thing that we want to consider after context and function is that we can change behavior. And we do this all the time academically. So if we have kids who are struggling with literacy, we know that recommending resource supports, increasing opportunities to practice literacy, maybe adopting a parallel curriculum, or bringing in paraprofessional support to increase opportunities to practice literacy skills. This is effective, and we've been doing this for a really long time, and that is RTI for academics, and we know this works. But it works equally well with behavior. So if we struggle with kids lining up, we can use visual supports in an elementary school setting in order to promote and provoke positive lining up behaviors. And that's an evidence-based practice. And so again, we see how positive interventions are very effective in changing not just academic behaviors, but also social behaviors. It can also be very effective to address the mental health needs of our students. So if we have a student suffering from depression or a mood disorder with no friends and no social connections at high school, we might want to consider implementing a peer-mediated intervention where we recruit peers to support that student and train those peers to support that student. And by doing that through a behavior plan, we can directly address the mental health needs of our student populations. And then we also have all sorts of other self-regulatory or other behaviors in our schools around cell phone use. But we know that if we implement solid school-wide cell phone policy interventions, we can curb cell phone use and inappropriate cell phone use even at the high school and middle school settings. So again, just a couple of examples how we can match interventions to a particular problem and really change student behavior. So why do we write good BIPs? And again, it's to recommend evidence-based practices to prevent problems from occurring teach new skills, keep everybody safe. And we know that this is a much more effective approach to changing student behavior than the good old simply relying on discipline and punishment. And it's not that discipline and punishment can't be very effective in changing behavior, but when they are standalone interventions, we need to remember that you can't punish good behavior into a kid. That's not what punishment does. It's a behavior suppressant. Suspension does not improve academic or social skills. That's been shown decade after decade. And punishment does not create a positive school climate, which is generally where good behaviors flourish. So from here, let's consider that we have a student that we want to work with. And this is what I would ask. I see that Lisa and Denise are joining us here. So what we're going to start edging into is, more than anything, modeling a process for behavior intervention planning that you could adopt at your school. And it might start with an informal assessment via a PLC meeting or a behavior intervention team meeting or a student study team meeting, where a group of educators and support staff maybe who are familiar with the student conduct an informal assessment. You know, it's nothing more than a team meeting around context and function. And Behavior Advantage provides a ton of resources and content to guide your teams to engage and complete these processes. And so one of the tools that we provide is a simple BIP team collaboration form, which will then allow your team to very effectively and efficiently design a matched behavior intervention plan for the student. So this form would be filled out either prior to the meeting or during the meeting, or just used to guide discussion. So who are we doing this on? What's the problem? What's the context? Where is this occurring? Why do we think this is occurring? What would we want the kid to do instead to get their needs met or to cope when their needs can't be met? And how does the student escalate over time? So this form can be filled out very quickly. It doesn't have to be filled out in the entirety. It's just to guide discussion in a PLC meeting. And then we would take that information into Behavior Advantage software, and we would look at how does that assessment of function and context guide us to determine prevention strategies, teaching strategies, and response strategies. And if nothing else, we find this information, which is also in our online clinical support that we offer through our software. But this concept is just such an important piece for people to understand. When you look at context and function, which can be antecedent analysis, problem behavior and skill deficit analysis, and consequence analysis, we want to always remember that it's when and where and under what conditions does the behavior occur, the problem behavior occur. That antecedent analysis should really help us determine our prevention strategies. And our prevention strategies should be designed to do one or more of three things: to either neutralize or eliminate triggers if possible, provide support in an antecedent context. So when the kid is walking into a trigger situation, how are they being supported or encouraged to cope in those environments? And then thirdly, just remembering that antecedents and triggers are not good or bad. They trigger positive behaviors as much as they trigger negative behaviors. So part of prevention is really inserting positive triggers that will elicit and provoke good behaviors in a kid. And I'll show you a million examples as we move forward on our case study on how we would do that. When we consider problem behavior, function, and skill deficit, we want to remember that usually problem behaviors communicate a need. Rarely is the need itself bad. It's just how they're communicating the need that's inappropriate. And that if they had more skills, they probably would do it a different way. So let's give them those skills. And that's where we want to look at what I call the holy grail of a BIP, which is, what do we need to teach this kid to do differently moving forward? And then the holy grail is, how do we effectively teach them that? And Behavior Advantage guides you through how to sync up direct instruction, prompting, and motivation in order to teach social skills and replacement behaviors. This will all make sense if this is, when we get into the software. or you're already familiar with this concept, and you'll see how Behavior Advantage can really guide your teams to do this more effectively. And then lastly, we just need to recognize that our consequences thus far have not been effective in changing behavior. So we need to look at a different way moving forward. And so if the teaching strategy section of a BIP is the holy grail, then I call the response strategies the bitter pill of a BIP. And the bitter pill is this: it's that the student's behavior is not going to change overnight. And so we need to make sure that we are responding to future behavior problems as effectively as possible to de-escalate, extinguish, and to keep everybody safe, and do that as consistently as possible while the prevention and the teaching strategies have time to change behavior. Okay, any questions on that thus far? And I see Dan, Lisa, and Denise on here, so feel free to use the chat or raise your hand or unmute yourself. Happy to answer any questions as we move forward here.
We also have Andrea, Elizabeth, and Betty have also joined.
Oh, great. Oh, I need to expand my thing here. Oh, welcome, Andrea, Elizabeth, and Betty. Any questions thus far on this process? I mean, that is a super fast overview of why and how we build behavior plans. And I'm not sure what all of you do for your respective school districts or educational agencies. So that might be review. But again, it's something that's really important for your team members to have that perspective, because if they think that behavior is going to change overnight, we need to make sure that they understand we're really embarking on an effort around habit reversal, if that makes sense. Okay, well, I'll keep going, but if there's any chats or questions or anything to add to this, you know, I'm going to ask you to consider participating here in a few minutes. So just a heads up to help me solve Shane Burton's problems here. So at this point, I might say, all right, it is, depending on where you are, 11:18 or 12:18 or 1:19 at this point. And I might say something like, all right, everybody, thanks for joining the PLC on Shane. I know it's been a tough year, and I know that, you know, we had hopes that Shane would kind of turn it around, but he has not. And we need to come together and come up with a plan to help him. So we've got about, 30 minutes here to build a simple behavior intervention plan for Shane that we will then implement and see if we can change some of his behaviors. So we all know Shane, but here's a little bit about him. Shane is a 16-year-old male in 10th grade at Seaside High School. He enjoys art, especially drawing and science fiction literature. He reports only having 1 or 2 friends at Seaside. He shows great compassion for students with significant disabilities when he provides support in Seaside's special day class for his practicum course. Shane has struggled both academically and behaviorally across several school settings, including math, science, and English language arts. Behavioral challenges include being tardy to class, ignoring teacher instructions, failing to initiate or complete tasks, arguing with staff, yelling, minor property destruction, and leaving the classroom without permission sometimes. He has received 6 office referrals so far this school year, and he is being referred to Seaside's Behavior PLC team, that's us, to develop a simple BIP to support Shane in targeted school settings. Okay, so we're Shane's team. Okay, and we all kind of know him. We just kind of got a background on him. But let's make sure that everyone has a little bit of direct observation on Shane. So let's watch Shane in action. And I know we're all educators here, so let's assume this. What you're about to see is Shane in action, but this isn't a single time. He's been doing stuff like this periodically, every week, every month. Now, this is kind of a big episode. That's why, let's call this kind of one of his more intense episodes. But the shutting down and the arguing and the defiance, that's going on almost daily. And so that's why we're all meeting. So let's just kind of get a flavor of how Shane's behaving. I'm sure you'll see that we've worked with kids like this before.
Okay, take out your math books, turn to page 47, please. Look at problem number 1. Shane, would you take out your math book, turn to page 47? Shane, would you work that problem for me? Who'd like to work it? Okay. Okay, nice work. Problem 2, Shane,
I don't even know what page we're on.
we're on page 47. Why don't you have a seat in the back of the room? With your math book. Would like to work problem 2? Anybody? Okay. Is that correct, Shane? Shane, is that correct? Hey, we're not gonna go on until you answer me. Is it correct?
I'm not playing your stupid game.
Excuse me, I need you to have a seat. Shane, don't walk away from me. Shane,
Okay, so that's Shane in action. The referral actually came from Mr. Alley, the math teacher here. And yet some of us have worked with Shane before. One thing I want to say also here is that Behavior Advantage is not just a software company. We provide online clinical support with a board certified behavior analyst. So in this case, you might say, well, we brought Aaron in from Behavior Advantage to help us out and guide our PLC team meeting here. But Lisa and Betty also work with Shane. We might say that Lisa's his ELA teacher and Betty's another teacher familiar with Shane. And we talked about filling out that simple BIP collaboration form. And we might say that Lisa and Betty already filled that out for us, which is awesome. And so they defined the problem as defiance, refusing to follow instructions after multiple times asked, throwing materials and property, and leaving the classroom without permission. They also noted that even though Lisa and Betty work with Shane, they don't have as many problems as Mr. Alley does, but they have some for sure. But they talked to Mr. Alley and kind of guided him through this BIP team collaboration form. And he really was able to kind of look at how he interacts with Shane and was able to identify, yeah, you know, a lot of it is when I ask him to do work, it really upsets Shane when I ask him to solve problems in front of the class, but that's how I involve the whole class in direct instruction. So I would really want Shane to learn to be better at that. And Lisa and Betty also kind of talked to Mr. Alley about, you know, what do you think, why do you think Shane's doing this in general? And he looked at this form and he's like, you know, I think it is absolutely to escape and avoid these tasks and activities. And then what would we want Shane to do differently? You know, rather than escalating and blowing up, in order to avoid the work, you know, that's not totally unreasonable, or in order to avoid not being embarrassed in front of his class. And they walked through, like, you know, maybe if he had a better way of communicating that more respectfully, I would be okay with that. Maybe we could explore some private participation options. And this is all just a discussion with Mr. Alley around what he would be open to and trying to get him to understand where Shane might be coming from and assessing context and function. And then they also mapped out how he escalates. So they bring that to us. Okay, so we have this form here that we're looking at, and we kind of have a good sense of what's driving Shane's behaviors. So at this point, what we might do is we might pull up then Behavior Advantage. And let me do that right now, right here. And we might say, all right, everyone, let's build a behavior plan for Shane. So I've already entered Shane in here into the program, and I could go over to the student actions button and I could just click start a simple BIP. I've already started one, so I can click on Shane's name, and this is his file. I've got student info tab, I've got our behavior supports tab, and our graphs tab. So if I click on behavior supports, I see that a simple BIP has already been started. And I could say, all right, everybody, so thanks for discussing Shane, and we kind of got a sense of what's driving his behaviors. We still have about 15 minutes left in our meeting, so let's try to make some headway here on his behavior plan. I'll take care of this stuff: report name, reason for referral. We have content for all of this in our online manual and clinical consultation center. So let's just get down to it. And Lisa and Betty actually in their simple BIP already defined the behavior problem for us. So I can just type that in here. I can give it a label, and they said that work refusal would probably be the best label, but I could select from a million, or not a million, dozens of problem behaviors that kids typically engage in educational settings, or I can customize all the lists here in Behavior Advantage. So now, this is the problem we're trying to reduce. Let's build a simple behavior intervention plan for Shane based on his needs to prevent, teach, and respond to future behavior problems. So based on everything we looked at, we could consider prevention first. So if I click on the prevention strategies search field here, your toolbox of evidence-based prevention strategies has just exploded, and it's categorized by function: attention, escape, avoidance, access, automatic, and a long list of effective general prevention strategies. But we might say, well, in general, Mr. Alley said that most of this is about escape avoidance. And we kind of saw that in the video. So if I'm able to, let me open up my chat here again. If I'm able to ask any of you on the team to come up with 1 or 2 prevention strategies in the escape category, because we want to match our prevention strategies to these escape maintained antecedent situations, what, if you just think about something, a strategy that you think would fit well into Mr. Alley's classroom, things we could ask Mr. Alley to do before class, or support staff to do before class, or things we could work on Shane to consider. Do you see anything here on this list that you think would be a good match for Shane? I mean, should we adjust instructional pacing, or should we consider pre-teaching of content? Should we task analyze and provide checklists? Should we respond to initial signals that the student wants to be left alone? What would you all think would be a reasonable matched prevention strategy for Shane in this context? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what do you think clinically would be a good match? Any thoughts on that? And again, feel free to use your chat feature, or just unmute yourself if you want to talk one of these out. Okay, well, if I were to kind of consider this, I might be thinking, that one thing I might be able to do is talk to Mr. Alley about, do you see how Shane is kind of ignoring us? And I know that's disrespectful. I know I don't like that, but when we keep drilling in on that, it seems to escalate him. And if he's really trying to avoid being asked to publicly participate, maybe if we responded to initial signals that he wants to be left alone, that might be a good prevention strategy. We can always circle back at the end of class and talk to him more about what we expect from him. But this might be a really great way to avoid escalation. So if I select that from the list and I click save, all of these prevention strategies come with a brief description as to why they're effective and how to implement them, and pre-K elementary examples and middle high examples. And so I might look at this, and this is all editable, and I might say, I like this description. I'm going to get rid of that pre-K elementary example, and I might come back and kind of change Jack to Shane and adjust some of this stuff. He's not in middle school either, so I might just get rid of that. But I like that. That's a good strategy. And then someone on the team might say, in addition to that, I know that I've worked with Shane last year, and if he's given kind of a heads up on what he's going to be asked to do before class, it really helps him get his head around what the expectations are. And if we drop that into a checklist, I think that he would be open to kind of having a checklist that he could privately look at and it would help him get some more work done, especially to get started at the beginning of class. So might recommend that. And again, I'll kind of get rid of some of this, get rid of some of this pre-K language, but it's all editable. And then I can say, well, who's responsible for this? And I don't have to fill this out, but I could say that, Aaron will be responsible for setting up some of this material development and pre-training. So I'll just say this is pre-training stuff and where, classroom or in my office. And then I want the teacher to help me out with this during direct instruction in the classroom, something like that. And so that's kind of really maps out our prevention strategies. Now, again, one really cool thing about Behavior Advantage is your toolbox is just exploded, but the training that comes with Behavior Advantages, don't get overly excited about all of these new strategies, because if you get trigger happy here and you recommend 37 prevention strategies, they sound great, but always be thinking about implementation, even when you're writing the behavior plan. And what Mr. Alley does not want is a 37-page behavior plan. So it's better to recommend 2 evidence-based practices with the intent of full implementation than it is to recommend a bunch of strategies and not do any of them well. So with that being said, let's move on then to, like I said, the holy grail of a behavior plan. What do we want Shane to do differently? What are the behaviors we want him to engage in moving forward? And so we might look at this and say, well, we got a long list here of replacement social skills. And I'm looking at some of these, do I want him to request help or request a break? I mean, personally, I would say that whenever I'm working with a middle school or a high school student, I would come together with you all as the team and we would develop an outline of a plan, but then I'm always going to go to Shane and then review it with him. What do you think about this? Would you do any of this? Does this work for you? This is your plan. But, what are some of the things that, I don't want to teach him hand raising. He doesn't seem like he's very interested in that. But I might want to teach him to request a pass. What if I could talk to Shane and Mr. Alley and say something like, this is actually a case I've worked on in a high school a couple of years ago. I worked with a high school student and he was a really phenomenal baseball player and was doing some of the stuff that you see Shane doing. And we had an agreement with the teacher that he would give a very subtle baseball signal, which was just basically tugging on his earlobe. And that would signal to the teacher without him feeling like he was, putting himself out in front of the whole class. But that was a very subtle signal that was just like, please don't ask me to do more work right now. I'm just not going to do it. And I don't want to escalate. So give me a pass. And it was just a quick little earlobe shake. Now, I don't know if Shane would do that, but we could talk to him about that. And would Mr. Alley be open to that? Would that be a respectful, shared communication between those two that would maintain the integrity of the educational setting and allow Shane to communicate respectfully to the teacher that he doesn't want to come up in front of his peers and get a math problem wrong or even try to solve a math problem? So Mr. Alley might say, yeah, I would be open to that. So that would allow him to get out of doing the work. But then Mr. Alley's turning around and saying, yeah, but Aaron, what if he's tugging on his earlobe all day? I need the kid to do some work. And I might say, well, we could look at self-management skills. We could look at teaching him work ethic, motivational system for that. But we could also ask, what would you think about Shane not necessarily presenting the content publicly, but what if he had a whiteboard or a math notebook and he gave you the ear tug? If you gave him another signal or even just raised an eyebrow signaling like, okay, you don't have to get up, I'll let you go on this public participation, but you better open up your math workbook and solve the problem in your math workbook, and I'll check that after class. And if this is a good arrangement between Mr. Alley and Shane, then we're all kind of getting our needs met. But then, so if everyone says, okay, that would be great. I like both those behavioral skills. That would work. I'm getting the math done, and I'm also not getting embarrassed in front of my peers. Okay. The holy grail, though, is how do you teach a kid like Shane to do these things? And what I'll tell you, pulling the curtain back, is it's not as simple as just telling him. It's not as simple as just telling people to change. Telling people to change will elicit about a 5 to 10% behavior change rate. But if you tell them to change and then you provide direct instruction to change, you'll go up to 80%. So how would we provide direct instruction to a kid like Shane? And I might say, I can search all these fields. I do want to provide some guided discussion. I want to give him an opportunity to self-advocate and present this plan to Mr. Alley. I'll role play that with him. But then when we're in the classroom, I'm going to insist, as uncomfortable it might be for Shane, to do some role play and some practice opportunities with Mr. Alley. So Shane, go sit at your desk. This could be during lunch with only the 3 of us in the room. And let's kind of role play how this would look, how this would feel. It doesn't have to be super goofy and silly, but I want Shane seeing and feeling what it would be like to tug on his ear, how Mr. Alley should respond, so on and so forth. And then when I'm not in there, how do I want Mr. Alley to signal Shane to follow these rules? And I might say it might just be a gesture prompt, and that's that baseball signal piece. What would be the motivation for Shane to tug on his earlobe? And I would say probably just not having to get up and publicly present. So just don't make him do that. That'll reinforce the ear tugging. But then what's going to motivate him to actually do some work and use his new math workbook? And I might say, well, I know his parents, and I think that we could come up with a home-based reward system that if he did more work, his grade naturally would go up. And maybe we can come up with an academic contract or something like that with the family that would really help remind him to do some work. And then I can just type in some notes down here, like request a pass could equal a pre-taught baseball signal to discuss. I'm just going to type some general outlines here because this plan will be formalized after we talk to Shane and Mr. Alley. Alternative math could be a whiteboard if those are in the classroom, or a math notebook. And then the home-based reward, just kind of think about reinforcement. So talk to Shane about motivation. And we have a bunch of motivational inventories. And I'll just show you this real quick. If I click on this little, let me save this. If I click on this little question mark up here, this opens up our online help console and clinical support area. And there is a ton of content here. There are training videos. There are resources for simple BIPs, functional assessment, reinforcement assessment. It goes on and on. We actually have universities utilizing Behavior Advantage to teach their graduate students in FBA and behavior planning, and they're adopting a lot of this content as their curriculum. So using Behavior Advantage can really expand capacity in your agencies. So say we do something like that, and then we just have to talk about response. All right, if Shane is being disrespectful, maybe we should just calmly remind him of his choices, give him 5-10 seconds to process that, use gesture prompts. And then if he continues to escalate, I can look at this and say, I could say maybe signal him to practice a calming routine if we're going to teach that. I can call in another student. And then, if he just doesn't do any work, I can process with him after class to avoid a big explosive blowout. And there's obviously details we could type in here and all of that. We could write a behavior goal to get everyone to understand how would we get from point A to point B with Shane? What would it look like? Maybe initial objective is that he agrees on the behavior contract. Secondary objective could be something like we actually go and meet with Mr. Alley. He practices self-advocacy and we role play some of this stuff. And then our goal could be by the end of the year, Shane's responding and utilizing the math notebook and the gesture prompts. And we should see a decrease in these problem behaviors, and we can track all of that in Behavior Advantage. But the cool thing here, I think, is that roadmap to change, that work we just did, and we still have, if I look at my clock, another 10 minutes left. I can type, just click on report and open up a very clean, professional behavior intervention plan report that shows who we're doing this on, Shane, why we're doing this, the problem behaviors we're trying to reduce, the prevention strategies we're going to implement and how we're going to implement them, who's going to do that, the Holy Grail, which is the new skills we want to teach Shane and how we're going to teach them, and then how we're going to respond to future instances of problem behavior. I mean, that is a very clinically sound behavior intervention plan, and it is less than 2 pages long. This is the roadmap, okay? Now, as beautiful as this is, it's not going to change behavior just because we wrote it. So what we need to really consider is how do we support Shane and Mr. Alley to actually implement this simple behavior plan with fidelity. And so I might click on the implementation checklist and open this up, which is now a very simple document that breaks our behavior plan down into its bullet point components. This is, in this case, only a page long. And we're going to talk about how to roll out implementation. We can check back in a week or two and see if we've moved some of these zeros not implemented to ones partially implemented or twos fully implemented. We can use this document to track training needs, resource development, material development, and then just track implementation over time so that we can make database decisions on our end as far as, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Another important reason to keep simple BIPs simple. If they're really, really complicated and we don't have the staff or resources to implement it, it's probably not appropriate to the setting. But in this case, this seems very appropriate. And then lastly, how are we going to progress monitor this? And so we can look at, all sorts of, ways of doing that. We can, let's look at maybe something like Zach. Let's say we started taking data on work refusal behaviors and using his replacement behaviors. And we might see something like this over time, where we're just very simply documenting when Shane or Zach start engaging in work refusal behaviors and when they stop. That gives us a simultaneous frequency and duration data collection tool. And then is the student using their replacement behaviors? And this is the graphs that Behavior Advantage automatically generates that can help us determine if our plan is working and what to do next. And to just give you a flavor of that, for Zach, for instance, and I know it's a different student, but similar problems. If I create a data collection tool specific to his simple BIP, I automatically in Behavior Advantage get a customized data collection form that I can print out and hand to paraprofessionals or teachers, and they can fill this information out, or they can go directly into Behavior Advantage and enter it themselves and just date, start time, stop time, frequency count, and then all of that gets populated and used for progress monitoring. We have other data collection tools around check-in, check-out, self-management, behavior-anchored rating scales. Behavior Advantage also provides an entire format and formula for completing functional behavior assessments, behavior intervention plans, and behavior emergency reporting. So today's just about, more than anything, simple behavior intervention plans. And again, all of this can come with online clinical support with the BCBA to guide your teams or your support staff on how to utilize this model to quickly and efficiently develop simple behavior plans. And it works really well if you have any kind of a PLC model or a BIT or SST model where staff can come together and collaborate on behavior planning. Any questions on that piece so far? or anything else you would like to see is in Behavior Advantage other than the simple BIPs. I think in a couple weeks, April 19th, I believe, we're doing another training on check-in, check-out through AESA. And that training is going to look at what I've found over the last 20 years is, we know that check-in, check-out is a solid evidence-based intervention that can be utilized across tier 2 and tier 3 students. But I think what is often missed is the underpinnings that make check-in, check-out work. If check-in, check-out is being implemented as a clipboard where staff follow kids around and they ding them when they're engaging in bad behavior, and they benevolently give them higher points when they engage in good behavior, that's not really capitalizing on the effectiveness of self-monitoring and self-management. And so during that training, we'll look at Behavior Advantage, but we're really going to dive into clinically what makes check-in, check-out such an effective intervention, because oftentimes we're not doing it right. And it doesn't work unless it's implemented with fidelity. So if you have anyone that's interested in really learning more about that intervention, I know AESA is sending out reminders on that, and I think that's on April 19th. Thanks, Denise. Just feel free to reach out. I'm going to type in my email here. Oops. And feel free, anybody, if you do have questions once we get off, to email me with any questions, or if anyone would like to look more at Behavior Advantage, we're happy to meet with your team and go over that. Lisa or Elizabeth, do either of you have any questions before we sign off?
No, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for being here.
No, thank you for the information. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
And
And again, there's my email. So I'm always around. Just feel free to shoot an email. Happy to answer questions or to share more information.
Aaron, you know what? I do have a question. This is Denise.
Yeah.
So this is it's not only is it a software package for districts or schools to implement, there's also a treatment modality behind this that schools can access if kids, have more of a mental health issue, things like that. Did I understand that correctly in the beginning?
Yeah, so what we provide is online clinical support packages. And so if you sign on with the software, which is a subscription model, but it's a subscription model that provides unlimited access to your school district or your educational agency. So we really promote a multidisciplinary approach to behavior planning. So we want everybody to be able to access the information, take data, progress monitor, get used to that model, from paraprofessionals to site-based administrators. But that being said, we all, need some extra support on tough kids, or kids that we just feel like we can't think of what else to do, or what would be a most effective way to progress monitor the situation, or could you help us build a plan or fill out the simple BIP, or what would a good self-management intervention look like for this kid? And what we provide is online clinical support with a board certified behavior analyst. I literally, just before I got on this training, I met with a elementary school in Wyoming, and I meet with them regularly, and they just said, hey, we got a kid. We don't know what to do. This is what we've tried. This isn't working. And we talked about them for an hour, and they have a new plan now. And so that's what we can provide. And sometimes we open up Behavior Advantage and we look at the software to help document what we're doing. And sometimes we don't. Sometimes the team just needs to get a couple pointers or different ways of thinking about it. And that is purchased in packages as needed.
Okay, thank you. So your subscription, is it like, so if an educational service center purchases this subscription, is it just for ESCs, or is it like a seat license to other districts to implement? How does that work?
So we have we have partnerships with ESCs, ESAs and around the country, and we are first and foremost more than willing to customize how you would like to work with us, because you're usually working with other school districts and serving other school districts in your area. So a couple of our partnerships, everything from the ESA just says, hey, I just want our clinical support staff to have that, and they're going to use it in their work with the school districts that they support. And then we have other partnerships where we're working with the ESA or the ESC to expand access to the school districts that they work with. And we're more than willing to, meet with you and kind of figure out what your situation is and what we can do to help the students you serve, and then also the school districts more broadly that you serve.
Okay, that makes sense. So you will customize or tailor to whatever districts are in need of.
Yep.
Okay,
Exactly.
perfect. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Great. Well, I know we're getting kind of close to our time. Thanks again, Chris and AESA and Ann for providing an opportunity to meet with everybody. And just let us know, reach out if anyone has any other questions.
Thank you.
Aaron, thank you very much. It was terrific.
Yeah, thanks. It's
Thank
always
you.
fun.